Hello, my name is Renee Giovarelli, and I'm sorry to not be there with you today. It's 3:30 in the morning where I am, so I instead am recording this for you. I am a co-founder of Resource Equity, which is a small NGO in the US, and we focus on women's land, property, and natural resource rights. So I'm going to talk today about women's engagement in governance of drylands. I think first it's important to talk about land tenure and what the system is for agrosilvopastoral systems. Generally, the community holds the rights to manage and control use of the land. In most cases, the community either owns the land or the state owns the land, but devolves the power to manage and benefit from the land to the communities. Land can be designated in different categories, though. Just because it's community held doesn't mean that it's necessarily all common use. It could also be, and very often is also, household use, and we'll talk about how that matters in a minute. The key feature of rights to common use land is membership in the community. And the membership can be defined either by custom or by law, or often by both. So this is just a visual of what I was talking about. So collectively held land by the community doesn't necessarily mean that it's used and managed collectively. So if we look at the bottom layer, there's land used by the household. It's also managed by the household. And the relationship and the transfer of wealth is at the household level. And here, the bundle of rights varies by sex within the household. But the rules that are followed are really the household rules. On the other hand, for land used communally, the land is, and that tends to be forests and pastures, it is not managed by the household. Rather, it's managed by an authority that's sanctioned by either custom or the state. And again, usually both. And then it's managed generally by a governance body of users. And the relationship focus there is in community. And again, the bundle of rights can vary by sex, but it's according to the community norms. Final definition that we'll use is customary tenure. Many agro-silvopastoral systems are primarily follow customary tenure. Ancient systems can be involved. And what we mean by that is that there's a set of rules and norms that govern the community allocation, use, access, and transfer of land and other natural resources. Customary systems reflect the social values and norms of the culture, and they can be based in customary legal system or formal legal system, or both. There are formal legal systems that essentially legalize customary land systems. Even if they are not formally legalized, they are the legitimate tenure system in the context where they exist. Customary tenure systems tend to be the most legitimate ones, even if there's a law that says something different. And the system and how it affects women can vary from country to country and even within countries. And a lot of this depends on the social norms of the community and what they're based on, ethnicity, tribes. So they can vary within the same country, of course. So if we think about the bundle of rights to land and resources, the important right in the case of collective land or communal land is governance. And there are really two questions that have to be answered in terms of governance of common use land. Who is a member of the community? And the sub-questions are: who decides who's a member? What rights do members have? What rights do non-members have? And can the status change? Can a member become an outsider, and can an outsider become a member? And then the next question after that is: who has the right to participate in governance or control? So you will see in many situations where people are not members of the community. They still use the land, but they're not considered community members. And usually that means that they cannot participate in governance. So can they participate at all? And then the second question under governance is, can women meaningfully participate in governance? So what are the barriers to women's community membership? The big issue here is that usually within common use land, there are differentiated rights between members and outsiders. The members have a right to exclude. Outsiders often can use the land, but they have different criteria, different rights. Women are very often an outsider or a stranger in the community where they live as a married person because they move from their community to their husbands. Of course, not all systems are patrilocal, but the majority of them are. So when women move from their father's household to their husband's household, they can be considered, in many cases, a stranger in that community. So their right to use the land is through a male household member. And that makes the tenure insecure in case of death or divorce. And often it means that women are abiding by the norms of the husband's community, and very often that means not being able to participate in governance, which is the next issue. What are the barriers to participation in resource governance? The number one barrier that can really affect women is only community members can govern. The community policies, rules, even bylaws that are developed, if they don't challenge gender inequalities, there will be gender inequality. So they may not always be forward-looking. They may be doing things at the same way they've always done things. No accountability by the community particularly, and also national institutions on gender equality. The next three are true in every setting I've ever been in. Women lack information. Women have household and family responsibilities that makes it difficult for them to participate in something outside of that. And women are not the public face of the family. So generally, if one person attends a meeting, and very often only one person does, if there are children, for example, it's going to be the man, and he's going to be the public face of the family, which means that he will be responsible for transferring information, for example. So women very often, what falls from this is women aren't aware of the rules and procedures of governing bodies. How do they work? They don't have confidence. They don't have skills. They don't have experience of working in a group. Often the location and time of the meetings is unsuitable. I've seen meetings held, after Friday prayer in a tea house that women aren't allowed to go into, for example, or the time might be right at the time when children need to be fed. So location and time can be a barrier. Just the presence of men can be a barrier depending on the social norms of the community. And it is true that, in fact, sometimes women are unwilling or uninterested in participating in governance. We saw this in Kyrgyzstan, which I'll use as a example a bit later, but there women didn't see the value of participating, and they didn't really feel like they had the time, so they didn't want to participate in governance of the drylands. So what do we mean by participation? This is a conceptual framework for that. This was developed by Bina Argawal, and it is graduated. So the first level of participation is just membership in the group. The second level then is you're a member in the group and you're informed of decisions after they've happened, and you attend meetings, but you don't speak up. And the third level is you attend meetings, you don't participate in decisions, but you are sometimes asked your opinion on specific matters, although you may or may not influence decisions. And I would say when we talk about quotas later, that quotas, as far as quotas can get you, really is this third one. participating to some extent, but without going beyond quotas, it's very difficult to get to the last three, which are you're asked to or you volunteer to undertake specific tasks. Next is expressing your opinion, whether or not it's asked for, and taking other initiatives. And finally, you have voice and influence in the group's decisions, and that's the ultimate goal for natural resource management, is that women's voice is part of that, and women may even hold positions as office bearers. But you can see that there's a long way, you have many steps to get to that last one. So why should we care, aside from the fact that we're all good people, I'm sure? There are many reasons. I'm just going to focus on two. Women play a major role in livestock production. Of the greater than 750 million poor livestock keepers in the world, 2/3 are rural women, but they only receive 5% of agricultural funding globally. Women provide 20 to 60% of the labor in livestock production, depending on the country, of course, and the context. And women are also key to successful livestock production because they do provide care and labor that livestock need to be productive. Also, women are knowledgeable. So this isn't just about equality or even voice, but women have much to provide to a natural resource management group. They perform essential activities, they get water, they grow food, they gather fuel wood, they tend animals, so they have knowledge, deep local knowledge about the environment and other natural resources. They are willing to use traditional knowledge related to natural resources, so they have much to offer in terms of the changing environment, the medicinal use of herbs. They have knowledge about how these things have been handled in the past and can pass them along. And finally, they do tend to be the people in the community that are responsible for transmitting this knowledge to the next generation and for transmitting the traditional value of stewardship. So I'm going to provide you with two case studies to show sort of how we get here, because I have done a significant amount of research, and very infrequently are women actually meaningfully involved in governance of natural resources, and particularly pasture land, I would say, and dry land. I think it's very uncommon for women to be meaningfully engaged. So in Jordan, a project that was done by the IUCN did engage women, and so that's what I'm going to tell you about first. So, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Hima means a protected area in Arabic. Apologies for Arabic speakers. And this is a system of management that originated more than 1,500 years ago, but no longer existed in Jordan, which was the pasture management was generally open access. There was a centralized system of pasture management, usually through protected area regulations, and the pastures had been degrading and suffering from climate change. So IUCN, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Arab Women's Organization got together, and they believed that the Hima system, because it had roots in traditional practice, and because at the same time it recognized the needs and the rights of local people, knew that it came out of the traditions of the culture, that it would be acceptable and effective alternative to centralized protected area system. So IUCN began implementing European Union funded projects, securing rights and restoring lands for improved livelihoods. In 2010, the project supported the revival of the Hima system in 4 villages within the Zarqa River Basin. And the system was integrated in a gender sensitive way, which I will show you. One thing I guess I should say what the HIMA system is. It basically is a system that allows exclusion of people from a particular area that is being regenerated. So it's really moving animals around an area. That's a very simplified and I think correct, but not detailed explanation. So the context for women is that women's work included care of livestock. So women cared for the livestock that the household depended on for income, but that care wasn't compensated, so it wasn't considered work. So the Arab Women's Organization, one of the things they did is they taught women to identify and use medicinal herbs on the pasture to earn additional income. And the great irony is that because women were traditionally not able to work outside the home, they didn't earn an income. They weren't really considered valuable in terms of participating in management of the resource. But once they were allowed to earn an income, that gave them status enough to participate in the management. But the process of unwinding the situation so that women could earn an income and therefore participate in management took quite a bit of time. And importantly, it did increase the amount of time women had to spend working. And we talked to women, they, were glad to not be getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out and gather herbs, but they would have done it again because of the income and what it gave them in terms of a voice and in terms of some autonomy. So the IUCN approach was to secure the right of access and exclusion to this specific area of land for the community, and then through that improve the governance of the pasture, and the national government gave them the right to particular land to do this project. They held stakeholder dialogues, including land users, governments, non-governmental organization, and they worked with the community for a whole year to convince people the benefit of this new HIMA system. At the same time, the Arab Women's Organization raised awareness about the benefits of including women in pasture management over the course of that year. So the AWO established a committee of women and worked with them on awareness raising so they understood the issues and on this use and sale of medicinal herbs. And their message was that women are important agents of change and holders of significant knowledge and skills related to mitigation, adaptation, reduction of risks relevant to land degradation. The message was not you should include women because it's the right thing to do. It was you should include women because they have something to offer to this process. And then IUCN did have a requirement that the management committee would have 40% women. After the year of gender sensitization, the committee was founded and there were 7 men and 6 women. And even when they were later elected, this same split was kept. So what were the factors that supported women's inclusion in governance? Support from the national and local government, support from international NGOs. They provided both financial assistance and technical assistance, and they imposed quotas. There was the support from the Arab Women's Organization cannot be understated. They're a strong national organization and they have offices in rural areas, so they knew the area. They took the time for gender sensitization an entire year. There are very few projects that are willing to take that amount of time, but in this case, it was really a critical piece. The training and the income helped, as I already said, and local leaders and local women's groups had to be involved for this to be successful, to include women in this management. And another point that I'd like to make is the Arab Women's Organization presented the issues, presented the value of women being involved without judgment. which can be hard to do, but really is a really important piece. Not going in saying, you've been doing this wrong, this isn't nice, but rather to really present reasons for women's engagement. The second case study is Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is only 7% of the land is arable and 43% is dryland, grassland. Traditionally, the Kyrgyz people are transhumant livestock raising. The law provides for equal rights to land for women and other protections. The state owns all the pasture land protected by the Constitution, but the pasture law in 2009 devolved the management and authority to rural communities. All residents of a rural community are also members of the pasture users union, that is by law for that area. So if you live there, you are a member of the pasture users union. The PUU represents interests of livestock owners and other pasture users. And then there's an executive body called the Jayat Committee, and the Jayat Committee and local government have authority to develop a community pasture management plan. The Jayat Committee is responsible for implementing the plans, monitoring pasture conditions, issuing use tickets, fixing fees, collecting payments, resolving land-related disputes, and managing the revenue from the pastures. The context for women, traditionally, similar to Jordan, traditionally women's rights were secured through male relatives. Often that meant husbands. Men are the head of the household under customary rules, and property rights, livestock, pasture use rights are attributed to men. Women enjoy access to pasture land as long as they're part of a pasture using household, and the household is a member of an associated clan living in that particular pasture using area. So the clans have specific pastures in Kyrgyzstan, and this gets into the rules about outsiders and strangers and insiders and clan members. Women are traditionally excluded from decision-making about allocation of pasture resources, and their interests are generally not taken into account in management and governance. And just to show you the difference between women's concerns and men's concerns, women are responsible for the summer pastures, for taking the livestock to the summer pastures, which are far from the villages and far from agricultural land. So their concerns include the lack of electricity and communication on the pastures, clean drinking water, lack of foodstuff, lack of household goods, not having childcare support, not having health care, veterinary medical services. All of these things women would like to see more of in the summer pastures. Men's concerns are infrastructure improvement, repairing roads and bridges. That's their number one concern. So they're very different concerns, partially because men rarely go to the summer pastures. So IFAD was the program here, Livestock and Market Development Program. They did focus on vulnerable households among small producers of livestock, including women-headed households and unmarried women, which were also generally women-headed households. One of the goals of the project was greater participation in the Jayat Committee and active engagement as a PUU member. They had a lot of difficulty with getting women engaged, so they called on the Village Health Committee. They gave the Village Health Committee a permanent seat on the Jayat Council on the veterinary subcommittee. The Village Health Committee existed already in the communities. They were separately organized. They were a volunteer body, and they were all female. So giving them a seat would ensure that a woman was also part of the management body. There were many women said they were uninterested in being part, and when they were talked to about the value of it and what they might gain from it and give to the process, there was more interest. So again, really a lack of information had an impact. Here are the factors that supported women's inclusion: the legal recognition of all residents of the community as members of the pasture users union just took the issue of membership away. The IFAD technical leads paid attention to gender and led on gender. The design included details. It wasn't just, we will include women, but how the project would mainstream gender in the management, in the programming, in the monitoring and evaluation. They assigned specific responsibility for gender to one core staff member. They didn't, give it out to consultants or have no one that was specifically responsible. The quotas helped, but again, were not enough. And there were some failures where the quota was met, but the woman essentially just sat in the meeting and didn't participate and didn't necessarily, didn't provide any opinions, and also didn't necessarily share anything with other members of the community. But one of the things the quotas did do is they provided a key performance metric for the project staff and for the JCs, so that they paid attention to women because they had a metric to meet. Otherwise, it would have been easy to just let it go. And in practice, when women were meaningfully included, the additional things were a commitment, knowledge, and skill of the field staff, and specifically the field staff's ability to mobilize, social mobilization. Just a few slides left on what works for engaging women in governance of the commons. Community organizing is really the only way I know of for gender-based norm change. There's a long history of mobilization led by women for public action to change gender-based norms, to combat discrimination, and to secure women's rights. Autonomous women's movements, working together with ministries and women's networks, can create reform if the women's movement is isolated and not at all connected to ministries or other broader networks. It's less effective. Some recent research across 70 countries found that countries with the strongest feminist movements tend to have more comprehensive policies on violence against women than those of weaker or non-existent movements. This is just to say that where there are these movements of women, they are fighting for women's rights, including and social norm change. And one of the outcomes of that is the success in terms of having women be seen and less violence against women. But importantly and critically, community organizing is most effective when women or men are also engaged, where there are deeply entrenched social norms, which is going to be the case everywhere we work. It's critical to design interventions that include community leaders with power and men more generally. Community organizing related to natural resource, management, I found this to be really interesting. There's evidence that the number of women's and environmental NGOs per capita in a country have a positive correlation with reducing various forms of environmental degradation. So 61 countries between 1990 and 2005, there was a connection between high levels of these environmental NGOs, community organized, and lower rates of deforestation. It doesn't speak to gender, but it does speak it does speak to gender actually, because it's women's and environmental NGOs per capita, not just environmental NGOs, sorry. This is the last slide, what works. So a literature review was done in 2015 that looked through to see what worked in terms of inducing broad-based participation and representation in agriculture, including Agrosilvopastoral land. And they came up with across the board 4 mechanisms that were successful, not necessarily in isolation. Legally mandating representation in leadership or membership, so quotas, but as we've seen over and over, they're not sufficient. Recommending increased representation through regulatory means. So this can be, the difference is that a legal mandate, to get something into a law can be a long process. There generally are not laws that say women cannot be involved. So having women have the possibility of being involved, one way to increase their representation is to make it a rule of engagement that women are represented at the local community level. It doesn't rise to the level of a law, but it's something the community agrees to, and that agreement is important. Use facilitators to work with communities to increase representation. Those can be outsiders, international NGOs, local NGOs, as it was in Jordan, or it can be members of the community themselves if they're organized and are good at facilitation and working with communities about these issues. And then information dissemination about benefits to inclusive development. This is lacking for both men and women, just a real lack of understanding generally about the benefits of including women in governance. And then, and this was not part of the literature review, adaptive collaborative management is important, which just means that you, as projects are being designed and as they're being implemented, to monitor and evaluate whether or not what you're doing is working and whether or not a change is needed. So thank you very much. I appreciate your your listening to what has to be less interesting than someone in person. Thank you.